Put your seatbelts on and get ready for the ride. We're the freaking New York Jets, so we're built for this shit.
Yes, new intro video. Hello and welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is Monday, February 3rd. This is episode 483 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. I thank you, as always, for joining me. Hopefully everybody enjoyed that new intro. It's a new era at One Jets Drive, so figured we'd spice things up a little bit here on the podcast. We got a lot more to discuss today on the pod. Since the last time we spoke, the New York Jets have added 3 new coaches to their coaching staff. So we will break down each of those coaches, give you the latest update on the Jets staff as a whole, as Glenn has now hired 10 assistants with more still to come. So we will break it all down here on today's podcast. As always, before we begin, we got to tell you about our podcast partners, starting with our friends over at BetUS. Super Bowl week is here, and if you want to get in on any of the betting action, check out BetUS, America's favorite online sportsbook. And when you're checking it out, click my link in the description of this video to get a 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. Also, our friends over at SeatGeek. If it's your first time using SeatGeek, use my promo code BUBSONSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase and get yourself out to some awesome sporting events, concerts, plays, shows. If you can buy a ticket, SeatGeek has it for anything. Check them out. Bubs on Sports at checkout. $20 off your first purchase. Get yourself out to some awesome events. Also, our friends over at Huga House. You're looking at the hat I'm wearing right now. If you want this hat or any of their other awesome hats, they just released new arrivals. They also released sweatshirts. If you want to get any of the awesome swag that Huga House offers, use promo code BUBS for 15% off any purchase. And when you use that promo code on your first hat, you'll get your second hat 30% off. So check them out and get yourself some awesome Huga House apparel. So here we go, episode 483. For those tuning in on YouTube, make sure to please like and subscribe. Appreciate your support as always. Thank you to those of you who have also joining me here on all the different audio podcast platforms. Appreciate your support as well. Really thank you all so much for the comments, watching the videos, subscribing, of course. It means a lot, and I love putting out content for all of you here, talking about our favorite football team. And the New York Jets, Aaron Glenn, continue to add to his coaching staff. 10 coaches now in place as the staff continues to round out. And since the last time we've spoke, he has added 3 more, 2 on the offensive side of the football and 1 on the defensive side of the football. So we'll start offensively here. Most recently, Scott Turner will become the new pass game coordinator here for the New York Jets. And out of these 3 hires, 2 of them I actually really like. One of them I'm still kind of iffy on. Scott Turner's one of them that I actually like here for the New York Jets. This is a guy that we talk about wanting experience, comes with some experience here for the New York Jets. He was the offensive coordinator with the Commanders from 2020 to 2022, and he was the interim offensive coordinator with the Raiders last season. So in total, spent 3 seasons in Washington as an OC and spent part of the year last year calling the plays in Vegas. So really about 4 years of play calling experience that he now adds to the table as the pass game coordinator, and to work under, obviously, Glenn and Tanner Engstrand the offensive coordinator. So I do actually like this hire. Scott Turner also has some quarterbacks coach in his background. He was the Vikings quarterbacks coach from 2014 to 2016. He was the Panthers quarterbacks coach for 2 years from 2018 to 2019. Of course, most recently spent the last 2 seasons with Vegas, where he was the pass game coordinator, then the interim OC. Also has some other experience in the NFL, wide receivers coach with the Browns back in 2013, and then even in some other areas, both NFL and the collegiate level. But probably really, when you think about it, one of the more experienced hires that the Jets are adding so far to this staff, right? Tanner Engstrand, first-time OC. We'll get to Charles London here in a second. Steve Heaton, obviously first-time offensive line, a heavy tight end background. Sean Jefferson, of course, inexperienced long-time wide receivers coach. But from a perspective, a play-calling perspective, offensive coordinator experience, Tanner Engstrand being a first-time guy, Scott Turner comes in as a guy that's got some of that background. So you hope that he can potentially help Engstrand a little bit. I still think where we stand with this offensive staff for the New York Jets, I would still like to see another guy such as an Anthony Lynn or a Todd Haley, or even, and I don't know if he'd be interested in it, but even a Doug Peterson. I think if anything, you would have hired Doug Peterson as your OC. I don't think he's going to go from head coach to taking a lesser role and work on an offensive staff as just an assistant. But I would still like to see one of those other coaches, a Haley and Anthony Lynn, somebody like that, where you can add that to having Scott Turner, but especially a guy that's been a head coach before, right? We talk about all previous first-time coaches where they have previous head coaches on their staff to help them through, right? Glenn has that in Steve Wilkes, but you would still like to see that experience on the offensive side of the football, which is Aaron Glenn's non-dominant side. So I think Scott Turner's a good hire. You would still like to see a little bit more. But as a pass game coordinator, I think when you look at some of what he was able to do, you know, Washington, you look at some of the play action type of stuff, what the Lions are going to bring, it kind of feels like it's going to match with what Engstrand, of course, wants as well in this offense when this team hits the gridiron here in 2025. So that's the first hire here, is Scott Turner. The other hire on the offensive side of the football, which I'll be honest, I don't love, and that's Charles London, new quarterbacks coach, mainly a guy with a running back coach background, which makes things interesting. You look through his resume, right? Texans running backs coach from 2014 to 2017. Bears running backs coach from 2018 to 2020. Also spent time at the collegiate level, both at Penn State and Duke, as a running backs coach. It wasn't until 2021 where he became a quarterbacks coach and kind of shifted into this new role where over the last 4 seasons, that's where he's been. 2021, 2022, he was with the Falcons as a QB's coach. 2023, he was with the Titans as both the QB's coach and the pass game coordinator. And then last year spent the season with the Seahawks as the quarterbacks coach, working with Geno Smith. So really only up until 2021 has he started to kind of dip his toes into the quarterback side of things, previously with a heavy running back background. When you look at Charles London, his resume, unlike a guy like a Scott Turner, right, where he at least has play calling experience and could potentially help Engstrand as a new play caller, as a first-time play caller, and a guy that's also held that role before, right? For Charles London, doesn't have a heavy experience at quarterback. And I think that is something that could cause some concern here. You look at the young quarterbacks that he's worked with over the last 4 seasons. Desmond Ridder in Atlanta and Will Levis in Tennessee. Neither have panned out. Not saying that London is the main reason, but obviously Ridder, Levis, it's not like this guy has a track record of helping young quarterbacks and benefiting young quarterbacks and setting young quarterbacks up for success. Now, I don't think really anybody, let's be honest, Desmond Ridder and Will Levis aren't very good. And maybe nobody can get anything out of him. But he obviously wasn't able to. And only 4 years to now step in as a quarterback's coach when this team is going to, it's not even so much of the team, the quarterbacks that he's already worked with. Like, I'm not blaming him for Desmond Ritter. I'm not blaming him for Will Levis. I'm just bringing up those names. But it's more so he doesn't have a ton of experience in the quarterback's coach position. And you're talking about a team that either this year or next year, definitely next year, is probably going to have a rookie under center. And you're going to need to rely on Charles London, a guy with not a ton of experience, a guy that doesn't have a very impressive resume from that perspective, to kind of be that mentor, that one-on-one guy for this said rookie quarterback. And I think there's a little bit of a risk there. But I could be wrong. You want to look at a positive? Well, we worked with Geno Smith last year. And Geno Smith, while he didn't have a great season, he's still kind of on that second part of that revive. And Geno Smith finished 4th in yards. He has been around for a while, right? This is a guy that's got a lot of experience, but I do question the whole, as a quarterback's coach, that type of experience isn't quite there. So don't love the Charles London hire. You know, what happens this year at quarterback, of course, is a big question mark. And what happens with 2026 quarterback, whether they draft one this year, I just don't know if this is really anybody's top choice to become that guy for a rookie when that inevitably is going to happen under Aaron Glenn, Tanner Engstrand, and eventually this offensive staff. So will be interesting to see how that develops. But Charles London, another name here to add to the New York Jets staff. The final name here on defense, and I said 2 of the 3 of these guys, I like the hires. Eric Washington, I really like this hire. And I'll be honest, and we'll get to this here in a second. We'll break it more down. I actually like the way the defensive staff looks a little bit better than the offensive staff, which could cause some concern because outside of last year, the defense hasn't been the issue with this team. The defense has actually been a strength. And let's be honest, the offense has been abysmal now. It's been for a very long time since this offense has been a competent modern day NFL offense where you're not watching them and it's like you're watching a game in the 1960s, because that's been the case now for a very long time. So, you know, we'll get to the offensive staff and how it all looks here in a second, but I really like this addition of Eric Washington. And I'll tell you why. Similar to Scott Turner, he's got a lot of experience. And I think when you look at this defensive staff as a whole too, there's a lot of experience here, right? Steve Wilkes, of course, the most notable one, leading the way. But as for Eric Washington, comes in as the new defensive line coach, so takes over for Aaron Whitecotton, who some thought might actually stay with the Jets, ended up going over to Dallas and taking over as their D-line coach under Schottenheimer, you know, of course, the first-time coach there. But Washington takes over as the defensive line. And when you look at some of his experience, he's been a defensive coordinator for 3 years, 2 from 2018 to 2019 with the Panthers, and it was the defensive coordinator last year with the Bears. So 3 years there. And then when you look at his experience when it comes to a defensive line perspective, there is a lot there. Was a defensive line coach with the Bears, with the Panthers, with the Bills, of course, a coordinator as well with the Panthers. Was the defensive line coach for the Bills in multiple stints. Or actually, no, was with the Bears in multiple stints, right? Bears defensive line coach, then came back last year as the defensive coordinator. So many stops has been a D-line coach. 2 stops has been a defensive coordinator. Has been around for a very long time. I really like this hire for Aaron Glenn's staff. I also like this hire because this is a defensive line that is going to need to continue to develop some young talent, right? You're going to need to continue to develop Will McDonald. Jermaine Johnson's going to need continued development. You're going to probably potentially draft somebody alongside Quinnen Williams, who's going to need to develop and become a true threat, because we saw last year not having a legitimate interior threat next to Quinnen Williams can do to this defensive line. Hint, hint, it destroyed it. So Eric Washington is going to have to play a big role fixing this defensive line from where it was a year ago, especially depth-wise, which Joe Douglas completely destroyed. I'm not going to go down that whole road. We all know what he did, but that's where we are. And I think a guy that's got a lot of experience, both as a defensive line coach and a defensive coordinator, is the right hire there. So that leaves you right now with this coaching staff. On offense, Tanner Engstrand, the OC, Charles London's quarterbacks coach, pass game coordinator Scott Turner, wide receivers coach Sean Jefferson, O-line coach Steve Heaton. When you look at the defensive side of the football, Steve Wilkes is the defensive coordinator, Eric Washington, defensive lines coach, linebacker coach Aaron Curry, and DB and the defensive pass game coordinator coach is Chris Harris. Your special teams coordinator is Chris Banjo. Like I said, really like the defensive side of the football. You've got two guys with a ton of experience. Steve Wilkes, former head coach, been a defensive coordinator in multiple stops. Eric Washington, been a defensive lines coach forever, been a defensive coordinator for 3 years, 2 separate stops, and he takes over as the D-line coach. I also don't mind Curry and Chris Harris, both 2 former players. Curry working under Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh, Chris Harris working under Mike Vrabel. 2 very good coaches that you hope from their side of the football as well, 2 defensive-minded coaches, you hope can take that knowledge and bring it here on this staff. So really defensively, I think they've done a good job. I have no issue with Banjo. The special teams does need some work, but I think Banjo, I know he's a first-time guy, but you hear glowing reviews from Peyton. Mike Westhoff, a guy that brought him in under his staff in Denver. I think Banjo will be fine. I'm not really too worried about him. I know some people have some concerns. He's young. Is he ready yet? I think he'll be fine. They needed a breath of fresh air. They needed somebody younger after having Brant Boyer here since, 2016. So I have no problem with Banjo. I'm fine with that hire, especially when you see what Denver's been able to do the last 2 years under Westhoff, a guy that he respects a lot, a guy that worked under him. I think Banjo can work here. Offensively, again, I think they're offensively, I would still want, and I still would like to see another veteran guy. And I talked about that earlier. Whether that's a Anthony Lynn, a Todd Haley, somebody like that, just because you look at the staff, right? Tanner Engstrand, first-time OC, first-time play caller. Charles London has only been a quarterback's coach now for 4 seasons. Not his background. His background is running backs. So you have some question marks there. Pass game coordinator Scott Turner, I like it. Experience, got a play calling background. I like that hire. Sean Jefferson, no problem with it. Right? If I think Sean Jefferson I think a lot of the Jefferson bringing him back is his relationship with Garrett Wilson. I know some people want to look at this wide receiver room and say, oh, why isn't Malachi Corley being developed? Oh, why were they near the top of the league in drops and all that stuff? And I get that, but I think some of the Corley stuff, some of that could have been even more outside of Jefferson's control. I also think some of these rookies sometimes are just more on the general manager. I mean, for Douglas to hype a guy up who barely played, I think some of that was on him. You look at who some of the guys Douglas passed up on. So I'm not going to kill him for Corley. Not saying Jefferson's this great coach, but I do think he has a strong relationship with Garrett Wilson, and I think that goes a long way with trying to keep him around not only just this year, but long term. And let's be honest, Allen Lazard, I don't think there's anybody in the NFL that can fix Allen Lazard. The guy's been a drop machine since his days in Green Bay. The only reason it would get covered up is because he'd make some big catches. And he's buddy with Rodgers. So if Rodgers would be doing well and all that stuff, then we'd forget about the Lazard drops. But that didn't happen last year. And that's not Jefferson's fault, I wouldn't say. So I have no problem with Jefferson coming back. Offensive line, though, again, there's a little bit of concern. Now, you're banking on Steve Heaton to be, right, Hank Fraley. Ideally, he learned under Hank Fraley, one of the best offensive line coaches in the NFL with Detroit. That's been a top offensive line in the NFL over the last couple seasons, really since Dan Campbell took over. And ideally takes some of that and brings it into this Jet team. But then again, he's got a very heavy tight ends background. And I know they kind of correlate, but maybe you would have liked the guy where he's going to be working with a lot of young talent, continue to develop that talent. Maybe you would have liked the guy that's got a track record of developing young offensive talent as opposed to a first-time guy with a heavier tight end background. So I think offensively, personally, you're banking a little bit too much on unknowns. I think defensively, you've got a really solid Washington and Wilkes bring a lot of experience. I think them two combined are more experienced than what the Jets have right now on the offensive side of the football. So I would still like to see one of those other names. And not only just, it's not even not even just the offensive staff. It's more so Glenn's a defensive-minded coach, right? I think it's important for him to get a guy that's been a head coach before on this offensive side of the football. We talk about it all the time. Wade Phillips with Sean McVay. McVay, a first-time OC head coach. Wade Phillips, a wealth of knowledge on that defensive side of the football. That helped McVay a ton. Yes, Glenn's got that on defense. You'd like to have them as well on offense. Get your Steve Wilkes on offense. If you can get that, I think you look at this staff, and on paper, you're okay with it. But like this all, we got to see what it's going to look like in September of 2025 when this thing kicks off and what games look like and everything like that. Only now we can only project, especially with a lot of these first-timers. You don't know what to expect. At least some of these experienced guys with track records, you can understand. So we'll see. But that's it. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below on the New York Jets coaching staff so far as it continues to round out here. And we wait for more moves to continue to be made as the offseason continues to roll on. So stay tuned. We'll have a lot more content coming your way here on the podcast. Make sure to please like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next time. Until next time, JETS, 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 Jets.